So, hi everyone. I'm very excited to be here today speaking with you. Hopefully you're enjoying your day here at OWASP and you enjoyed lunch. I understand it's a bit of a tough time right now after lunch, you're probably tired, but hopefully I will succeed waking you up a little bit, and I think we can get started. Today I want to talk about DSOMM, which is the DevSecOps Maturity Model, or OWASP DevSecOps Maturity Model. I will talk a little bit about maturity models at general, but before we get started and get into the actual practical details of DSOMM, I know some people might say like, hey, this is not a representation of my company, but quite frankly, this is just me bringing forward a lot of the learnings that we've had, implementing DSOMM into our dev organization and kind of automating it. So I'm excited to share with you the learnings that we've had, and I hope it could be beneficial for you. Now, before we start, I think we need to do a quick introduction here. My name is Probstein. I'm a solution engineer at JIT. I've been a full stack developer, full stack engineer for many years. I've joined JIT as a full stack engineer. Then after about 8 months this position, I've decided to do a little bit of a shift, mix things up, and I've become a solution engineer. Quick introduction to JIT. We're an open DevSecOps orchestration platform. We help modern dev organizations own their application security without hurting the dev velocity. We do that while automating a lot of open source tools, and that's a bit about us. Now, let's talk about DSOMM from theory to enforcement, because this is what we're here for. And just kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into maturity models, because I think it's really important for us to kind of set the baseline here of what a maturity model is. Then we will get into DSOMM and what DSOMM actually is, again, the DevSecOps maturity model. Then we will get into what, in my opinion, is the most interesting part of this talk, which is operationalizing DSOMM. A lot of these maturity models could be great in theory, but how do we implement it, right? How do we use it? And then, of course, we would have to talk about how to automate everything using open source tools. So, what images come to mind when speaking of maturity models, security maturity models? I won't put anybody on the spot here, don't worry. But I think we can all agree that it does not sound like the most interesting thing in the world. It's not very exciting. But hold on. When implemented correctly, maturity models can bring a lot of value and significant value to your entire organization. Doesn't matter if you're a CISO, if you're a developer, if you're a team lead, using maturity models could really help you make an impact and a difference within your organization. Now, I want to talk about some of those reasons and the values that the maturity models bring with them. The first one is translation to leadership. It's very common for technical personas to have a hard time speaking and explaining stuff to non-technical leadership personas. Because, you know, nerd to nerd, it's fine. We speak the same language, we understand each other. But we have to be able to translate and explain those things to the leadership. Maturity models could really help you do that, right? Because using simple matrix and numbers, which those maturity levels that we're gonna talk about, we can really come forward and say, hey, we're at this level, you know, maturity level 1, we wanna be at 2 and 3. This is what we have to do to get there, and this is the benefit of it. The next one is current state analysis. We're spending a lot of time and we're spending a lot of money bringing in consultants and doing and conducting internal analysis. By using maturity models, you can really do this analysis and understand where you are from a security perspective, all in the same swoop. The next one is gap prioritization. You know, it's basically identifying your gaps and giving them priorities, right? It's not rocket science here. In my opinion, the combination of current state analysis and gap prioritization, this really helps put everything that you talk about into context. This could help with the translation to leadership. Next is tools and automations. We have to automate, right? If a process is not automated, it's not going to last, it's going to die. Maturity models can really show us, like, current state, we're doing okay, but it's an automated process. here's what it's going to take to actually automate this process. Next is resource needs. This one is really important because you can come and say like, hey, I'm doing this right now at this level, but I want to be here, and I need these skill sets, and I need these resources to get there. And again, it's all circling back to the translation to leadership. Because once we know what we need, we will be able to explain everything in a more simple way. Last, but definitely not least, probably the most important one here, is risk exposure. We have to understand where the risks are, and we need to understand the levels of those risks. Hopefully this is making more sense and kind of woken you up and helped you understand that, you know, maturity models are not that bad, right? They could really help us a lot. Next, we're gonna talk about the leading maturity models out there. I'm gonna start with NIST security. NIST is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, and you know, NIST is quick to say like we're not a maturity model, but they sure do look like one and act like one in terms of all the levels that we see here. They have a lot of great publication out there. I'm sure you can check it out and see if you can utilize it in order to implement it into your organization and see your posture from a security perspective. The next one is CMI. Now, this is really levels, right? We see a waterfall shape here. We see levels 1 through 5. It's difficult, right? We have to do some effort in the translation process here, because what does initial mean to me? Like, how can I use this to connect this to how my organization is operating, right? So it's good on the levels, but it's tough on the translation for CMI. The next one is CSA, which is Cloud Security Alliance. This is a bit similar to CMI. We do love the fact that they've taken those steps and they kind of translated them and fit them into a specific area in cloud security, but it's a bit more broad, right? It doesn't really get into the DevSecOps perspective. The last one is OWASP SAM. Now, call out to OWASP SAM. We do love OWASP, obviously, but it's still a bit too rigid for us. We want something that would be more agile and more flexible. This is not it, right? But DSOMM actually borrows a lot from OWASP SAM, so you can check it out for yourself and see. Now, why do we love DSOMM at JIT? We utilize DSOMM, we integrate it into our dev organization, and we have some intakes, and I want to share with you some of the output here. Just to kind of cover that, I'm going to go over some of the reasons. The first one is open source. We love open source tools. We think they're the future. I think most of us can agree on that. This is pretty much why we're here today. But we like the fact that OWASP was built by the community versus something that was built to sell, for example. The next one is developer owned, right? It's called the DevSecOps Maturity Model. And we look at ourselves as an elite or high performing team in terms of velocity. And DSOMM is really all about developers. The next one is automation and tooling. There is integration from within DSOMM into different open source tools that you can utilize, and this is super helpful for us. This helps us identify areas that we need and we want to automate and see it more clearly across our lifecycle. The last one here is stakeholder value, right? DSOMM brings value to our developers, it brings value to our team leads, it brings value to our leadership. Again, all across the board, and this leads back to the translation to leadership. Now, a little bit background about DSOMM. DSOMM was built by a very nice guy, you can see him here, Timo Pagel, in 2017. He really focused on security and DevOps strategies here. It was based on a need for security prioritization for developers. Timo built this with a simple realization of, I don't have any way to rate how my organization is doing from a DevSecOps perspective. Now, this is a kind of more of a view of the way that DSOMM is constructed. This is the QR code to the OWASP page for DSOMM. Feel free to scan it. You know, it's open source. And the way that it's kind of built here, we see a bullseye shape, and this shape, along with the circular pattern here, this is what DSOMM uses to measure security. And we can see right away the difference from the CMI level, right, the waterfall shape, and the layers here are very specific. They're specific to software development. Each of these kind of layers is built by the dimensions and subdimensions, and the dimensions that we have is build and deployment, we have culture and organization, implementation, information gathering, and test and verification. Now, one thing I want to say, I'm not going to talk about it today, but I really think it's important just mentioning it. DSOMM also provides mapping to ISO controlling requirements. This can help you with compliance. Huge benefit for DSOMM, but I'm not going to talk about it today. We only have 40 minutes, and it's a whole talk by itself. Now, here's a better view of DSOMM. So we see the dimension here. Don't feel pressured to read it. It's very small. I'm going to go over it, so don't worry. We have the dimension, which is build and deployment, and then we have subdimension, right? We have build and deployment. And within each one of those subdimensions, we see our 4 maturity levels. And I think it's really important just to artificially choose four levels here. And in some cases, Timo actually collapses in those levels. So you might have a case that you reach level 3 and you also reach level 4. And you might have a case that, you know, level 1 and level 2 are combined. So you might be dealing with cases that you only have to comply to 3 levels and not 4. But you do have a maximum of 4 layers. Now, I hope you're alive and it's okay now. And this kind of making sense, and all of the overview of DSOMM, and kind of in terms of why we like it and how it's different from the other maturity models that we've seen. For this talk specific, we're going to talk about implementation and test and verifications dimensions. We're not going to go over all the dimensions in DSOMM. We don't have enough time. And we won't go into to each of the subdimensions for this. I really just pick the ones that we think we need to focus on. And I have to say here, you know, culture and organization and information gathering, they're still super important. But for us, this was the first cut to just kind of say, this is what I need in order to start improving my maturity, my security posture, right? This is the first cut. Now, let's get into the first one. Again, don't feel pressured to read. I'm going to go over everything. We're going to start with implementation dimension, and the first subdimension is application hardening. So we see those 3 maturity levels here. The first one is consider security explicitly during the software requirements process. The second one is increase granularity of security requirements derived from business logic and known risks. And the third one is mandate security requirements process for all software projects and third-party dependencies. Now, I know it sounds like a lot of buzzwords and big words, and where do we start? But don't worry, we will unfold this and we will break this down. For this subdimension, the way it's breaking down here is that we see we have 2 work streams. Okay, we see that we have the software requirement work stream and the supplier security work stream. It's not surprising that supplier security was separated into a different work stream because we see a lot of supply chain attacks these days. But how do we actually operationalize this, right? From theory to enforcement. So the way we looked at it is that we've got to keep things simple. It cannot be complicated. There is a lot to DSOMM. We have to make things simple here. And the flow that we chose was the flow that I'm presenting right here. It's basically understand the risks, then map the security requirements, which are the action items, what we need to do. Then we understand what tools we need to automate, right? What are the best tool for us, and then we have to test it. So, looking at maturity level 1, we're going to start with software requirements. High-level application security objectives are mapped to functional requirement. Basically, the objectives are that we want to prevent stealing of any data or code from within our application. This is the risk. Now, the action items here is that we want to scan code for vulnerabilities, and we want to scan code for hard-coded secrets. Now, looking at it from a supplier perspective, evaluate the supplier based on organization security requirement. And again, what does it mean, right? We need to make sure all the libraries in our software are updated with vulnerability remediated. And the action item for this one is we need to scan code for dependencies vulnerabilities. Now, we have our 3 action items, and we need to choose and find the best open source tool for this mission. And in my opinion, this is really the fun part, right? Again, we love open source tools. I said it once in this talk, and I will say it again over and over. It's truly a community power. All the open source tools, all the tools can be utilized in order to help you reach those goals and enable DSOMM within your organization. I just want to share with you some of the tools that we chose to automate. Not going to explain about each and every one of them, but just want to share with you the tools we're automating. So we have Trivy, we have Bandit, we have Cubescape, SandGrab, GoSack. Then we have Crawler, Zap, Nancy, Kix, OWASP Scanner. Just an overview of what we like and what we're using right now. So going back to the application hardening subdimension, we have the 3 action items here, and we need to implement the matching tools that we've chose. So for code scanning for vulnerabilities, we're using GoSec for Go. We're using SandGrab for Python, Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, Kotlin, Scala, and C#. For dependency scanning, we're using OSP Scanner for Python and PHP. We're using Nancy for Go, and we're using NPM Audit for JavaScript, TypeScript, Node.js, basically everything that is JavaScript based. And for hard-coded secret, we're using Gitlix, which support multiple languages. Now, I hope this is all making sense for you, in terms of the dimension, the subdimension, we have the levels, and for each of them we have to understand the risks, we have to map the requirements, the action items here, we have to choose the tools, and then we have to test it. Now we're going to maturity level 2. And again, we see those 2 areas here, and we'll start from software perspective. We need to have structured security requirements that are available and utilized by developer teams. We achieved that by utilizing those tools that I've mentioned. We integrated them into our development lifecycle. So we're there just by using those tools, boom, right? You have maturity level 1 and you have maturity level 2. From supplier perspective, build security into supplier agreements in order to ensure compliance with organizational requirements. Now, for this one, we're not quite there yet because this gets into a little bit more of a manual process, right? The supplier agreement. I know there are some tools out there. I would love to hear your feedback, tools that are helping managing supplier agreements. But for us, it was a bit of a back and forth with our suppliers just to get them to comply to our third-party pieces, security pieces. And for maturity level 3, again, from software perspective, it's build a requirement framework for product teams to utilize. And again, those open source tools that we utilize, that gives us a framework, right? So, of course, we have to understand which tools we want to automate, and that has to make sense for us. But we feel like we're already there with maturity level 3, again, just by using those open source tools. From a supplier perspective, we have to ensure proper security coverage for external suppliers by providing clear objectives. Again, this is a bit more manual process. It's a back and forth with our suppliers. So that completes the first maturity level, the first subdimension for us. I hope you saw how we kind of climbed up those levels, and hopefully I kind of help you understand a little bit better how to utilize everything using the open source tools. So up next we have the next subdimension for implementation dimension, which is development and source control. Again, don't try to read, it's okay, don't worry. For maturity level 1, source control protection and versioning, the action item for this one is we want to use SCM implementation through GitHub. Maturity level 2 and 3, we see they are collapsed. We have pre-commit checks and validations. And the action item for this one is we need to enable code scan from an application hardening subdomain and enable or enforce branch protection. And for maturity level 4, this is really going shift left all the way, right? We're seeing IDE extensions and local linters. So how did we do it? For maturity level 1, for this one is pretty simple for us. We kind of want to use GitHub, that's it. I realize it's not as easy for everyone as it was for us. We're a startup, so everything is in AWS. All of our repos are in GitHub. I know other companies might have legacy or on-prem, but for us it was kind of straightforward solution and a straightforward way to kind of achieve this requirement. For maturity level 2 and 3, we just talked about all the open source tools, the scanning controls here that we're utilizing. Also, with enabling branch protection, we've got those, we're there, we have maturity levels 2 and 3. For maturity level 4, we're there as well. We developed a VS Code extension that run code scans locally on the developer's IDE. The extension is not open source, but it's open for everyone to use. I know there are many security IDE extensions out there, so you can just choose what's right for you. Now, there is one more subdimension that I'm not going to talk about today, but I thought it was worth mentioning, and it's an important one. This is infrastructure hardening subdimension. I'm not going to go over all the maturity levels, but I do want to share with you the tools, the open source tools that we chose in order to utilize and achieve those goals. So for container scanning and Kubernetes scanning, we're using Trivia and we're using Kubescape. For cloud security and infrastructure as code scanning, we're using Prowler, which has supports for AWS, GCP, Azure. For the infrastructure part, we're using Kix, that has supports for Pulumi, CloudFormation, AWS CDK, Terraform, serverless, you name it. So now we're gonna go to the next dimension we're gonna go over, and this is test and verification. Again, I'm not going to go over all the subdimensions for this one, so I'm just putting it out there that DSOMM has a lot more than that. So we see again that maturity level 1 and 2 are combined, so we jump straight to maturity level 2. Maturity level 2 is security unit tests for important components, and the action that we need to take here is we need to have code scans in all of our repos, which we're doing, right? We talked about all the open source tools, and we need to have infrastructure scans across production. And I also talked about that. I just shared with you all the open source tools for infrastructure scanning. So again, we see that by using open source tools, we achieve those levels. For maturity level 3, we have security integration tests for important components. Basically, we need to have pen testing tools and web application scans. For this one, we use Cobalt. It's not an open source tool. It's a pen testing community. We utilize them basically just for compliance needs. But there are some great equivalents out there that are open source. ZAP is the most powerful penetration testing tools out there. Simon Bennett, the creator of ZAP, is actually working at JIT. He's also speaking at this conference at 2:45, so just be sure to check out his talk as well. And for maturity level 4, this is high coverage of security-related module and integration tests, smoke tests. Basically, we need to have stability and functionality testing integrated into the development process. And we did that by using Selenium scripts for our smoke tests. The next subdimension is consolidation. Now, I really like this subdimension because it really feels like it's bringing it all together. So let's look at the levels here. For maturity level 1, we have definition of quality gates, simple false positive treatment, treatment of defects with severity high or higher. The actions item here is that we need to implement and enforce code, infrastructure, pipeline, and third-party scans for each PR. We also need to implement branch protection and require approval before merging a PR. We need to have a process to review false positives, and we need to triage all of the high and critical vulnerabilities. So by using open source tools, just checking all the boxes here, we can make sure we have maturity level 1 covered. For maturity level 2, it's a simple visualization of defects. For this one, we just need to have a dashboard and reports of vulnerabilities backlog, and we need to have vulnerabilities per PR. Maturity level 3 is integration of vulnerability issues into the development process. We need to have treatment of defects with moderate severity, and we need to use vulnerability management system. Again, we see the shifting left here, right? The DevSecOps, we see it because we need to integrate those vulnerabilities into the development process. Now, the action items that we need to take here is we need to triage all the moderate and highs. We need to track, manage, and report on vulnerabilities. And one of the most important things here is the developer perspective. We need to integrate those scans into the PR process. We need to run them as a check, and we need to scan the code. If we find any vulnerability, we should leave a comment, right? Just like as a developer gets a code review from his peers, he you should also get a security review, right? A comment. We have to utilize disciplines like GitOps in order to enforce those policies, but that's a talk by itself, so we can just simply use branch protection, for example, and enforce this. For maturity level 3, this is advanced visualization. We basically need to have tickets and handle all the defects. Now, the action items for this one is we need to have detailed vulnerabilities with RCA, which is root code analysis, and we need to handle all the levels of the vulnerabilities. There are a lot more subdimensions here. You can achieve them all by using open source tools, and we saw that. And I just wanted to give you kind of a taste on DSOMM, because I know it can be hard and overwhelming, you know, even starting to think about maturity models. Like, where do we start? I believe that by utilizing open source tools, this is a great way to start. You can easily see how you can achieve these different maturity levels for DSOMM, how you're kind of climbing up. Now, to kind of sum up here, I want to circle back to the benefits that I've mentioned in the beginning, because looking at all these maturity levels and across those dimensions, we really saw how everything is just coming back to those values. So we talked about the tools that we need to use. Those tools are here to show us all the vulnerabilities that we have. This connects to the risk exposure. We know where the risks are, and we know the levels of them. The dashboards and reporting can really help us with current state analysis, and this can also help us understand the gaps. This all leads back to resource needs. We know what we need in order to climb up those maturity levels, and when we know that, we can explain what we need in order to climb up. And that again helps us with the translation to leadership. All the matrix, all the levels, it's kind of creating a simple language here for us to translate to leadership. Now, that brings us to the end of the talk here, and I hope this was helpful for you to kind of understand the different levels and how we're thinking about it at JIT. Now, this is my shameless plug here, and I hope OWASP won't kill me for that. But I wanted to share with you JIT as an example of kind of how we automated everything and how we implemented DSOMM into our dev organization. And the way that things are working today for most companies is that it's a manual process, right? You have the tool, you have probably Excel sheets or spreadsheet with all the vulnerabilities. It's hard to handle, and we've talked about the importance of automating stuff. You know, if it's not automated, it's going to die. We've automated everything in our platform, so we have an automated backlog. We also automate the process of utilizing those open source tools, because you have a huge amount of open source tools. And you can use this automation to enable DSOMM. If this is interesting to you, please stop by our booth. I encourage you just to check out our website. I would love to hear your feedback. So really, please reach out to me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys today. I'll be at the JIT booth if anyone has any questions. So thank you everybody for your time.